Hi, welcome back to Botany 101. My name is Angela Nishimoto. Remember last time we went through the ending part of photosynthesis and we got into respiration. There was quite a bit to cover. So today, what we're going to be doing is continuing with plants, of course, and the plant life cycles, and we're going to get into flowers, all right? Photosynthesis and respiration will actually allow a plant to produce flowers, okay? So our objectives, first of all, what the flower is and what the flower does. Secondly, the components of the flower, the parts of the flower that make it up, and what these components do. Thirdly, differences in the flower between dicots and monocots. Okay? Flower modifications, monoecious and dioecious. And also we're going to get into floral symmetry. Okay, so about the structure, overall structure of the flower. We're going to get into something called the inflorescence, right? Meiosis, and then lastly, alternation of generations. Okay? All right, let's see. So what does the flower do? Okay, it is actually the sexual organ of the plant. It does sexual reproduction. And the flower itself, okay, what is it? Pretty much it is a short shoot, a modified shoot with modified leaves. All right, pretty much I believe in our first lecture we talked a little bit about the structure of the flower, and this fellow here, very famous fellow, probably a symbol of the apogee of German Romanticism. His name, of course, was Goethe. Okay, and what did he say about the flower? He said, "Alles ist Blatt." It's all leaf. Okay, all the parts of the flower are modified leaves. Okay, so this very famous fellow, he might actually stand at the apex of European civilization. Okay. All right, so this modified shoot with modified leaves. All right. What is it made of? It's actually 4 whorls, okay, 4 whorls of 4 different parts on a short shoot axis, right? And these include the sepals. Okay, the sepals, remember, are generally sometimes the green part of the flower, all right? Sometimes they can be other colors as well, but oftentimes they're green, they're leaf-like, of course, being derived from leaves. And collectively, the sepals are called the calyx, and they function in protecting the rest of the flower while the flower is still in its bud phase. Okay? The petals are interior to the sepals, and these collectively are called the corolla. What do? They usually function in attracting a pollinator. All right, they function in attraction. Usually the petals in the flower are the colored parts. They can be pink, or they can be red, or they can be orange, or blue, or purple, or green. Any color you can think of, including black, amazingly. Isn't that amazing? Okay. Then we also have interior to the petals, you usually have the stamens. The stamens collectively are called the andrecium, but don't worry about that. Just remember that we have designated that the stamens are the male part of the flower, right? And here you have a nice photograph, and the stamen is made up of 2 parts. You have the anther and the filament. So here are pictures, okay, a photograph of stamens. This part, okay, is the anther, and it is actually the anther part of the stamen that produces the pollen, okay, which we'll find out later is the male gametophyte. Okay, this part here that connects the stamen to the rest of the flower, okay, is called the filament. Okay, the filament. Now this is actually the stamens, okay, of a plant called Hypericum perforatum, and I believe this is what people call St. John's wort. I remember a couple of years ago, maybe 2, 3, 5, 10 years ago, people considered that St. John's wort could be a treatment for depression, like a chemical treatment for depression. Okay. Now interior to the stamens, okay, you have the part of the flower known as the pistil. Okay, and you don't think of pistil like P-I-S-T-O-L, like, like a gun. A pistil is a female part of the flower, and generally the pistil is made up of 1 or more carpels. Okay, what is a carpel? A carpel is like a folded over leaf that has seeds inside. Okay, because remember always that the parts of the flower are all modified leaves, and the pistil is made up of 3 parts. You have the stigma. You can think of the stigma, sticky stigma, yeah. and we also have the style, because remember, females are stylish, right? Stylish, style, yes. And then we have the ovary. So the pistil is made up of 3 parts. You have the stigma, sticky stigma, you have the style, right, the stylish style, and then you have the ovary. Everybody knows pretty much that an ovary is that part that produces the ovules or the eggs, okay? Now generally, so you have the stigma, the style, and the ovary, and those are the 3 components of the pistil, okay? So we're gonna go over and take a look, okay, at a flower model here, right? And so what we have here is a model that you see before of the flower, okay? And then here, right here, okay? So here, toward the exterior part, the most outermost part of the flower, you have the usually green parts, okay? And these are called, remember, okay? They're actually called, okay, they're called the sepals, right? These are called the sepals, and they help to protect the flower while the flower is still in bud, okay? Right interior to the sepals, you have usually the colored part of the flower, okay? And these are called, of course, the petals. The sepals are collectively called the calyx. The petals are collectively called the corolla, all right? Now, interior to the corolla or interior to the petals, you have the male part of the flower, okay? This male part of the flower, okay, is called the stamen, right? The stamen is made of this part called the anther. The anther produces pollen. Yeah, all those little yellow dots in here. And here you have the filament that joins the anther to the rest of the flower. Then, interior to that, you'll generally have the female part of the flower, the gynecium. Don't worry about the term gynecium. Just remember this is female, right? Because GYN refers to female, okay? Here you have the sticky stigma. Usually the stigma is sticky or feathery, and that is related to its function because the stigma collects the pollen, okay? And the pollen is a male gametophyte, all right? Anyway, so here you have the sticky stigma. Here you have the stylish style. The style is just a little tube that connects the stigma to the ovary. And the ovary will have either 1 or several or many ovules inside of it, okay? So we have the stigma, the style, and the ovary, and that makes up the pistil, okay, the female part of the flower, okay? Alrighty, so we'll get back to the slides here. All right. Anyway, so the largest and the smallest flowers. So we have some, features that we'd like to look at. The first picture that we're going to look at. See this? When you look at that, isn't that a beautiful photograph here? This is actually not a single flower, but it is actually what we call an inflorescence. Okay, this structure here. Okay, this structure here actually has hundreds and hundreds of flowers on it, reduced flowers, okay? This part, okay, is just a sort of like a modified leaf that encircles the inflorescence. The inflorescence is a grouping of flowers, okay? Anyway, so does this structure remind you of something that we might see here in Hawaii? Think about it. This particular inflorescence is from a plant called Amorphophallus titanum. It's called a giant the Titan arum, all right? So this is in a plant family known as the Araceae, all right? And what does it look like? It sort of looks a little bit like an anthurium, right? So anthuriums have the same kind of inflorescence. You have a spathe, okay, this part is a spathe, and here is called the spadix. Okay, so this is a kind of inflorescence that you'll see in the members of the Araceae or the aroid family. So this here, you can see too, that this part here, okay, it's kind of like a blood red color, kind of like clotted blood, because that has to do with its function. Because of course, what does it do? It tries to attract something that's gonna like the smell of carrion or dead fish or dead meat. So these flowers here are probably pollinated by flies. Okay, flies will actually transfer pollen, okay, from one inflorescence to another inflorescence because the structure, okay, of a flower or an inflorescence is related to its function. So what is the job of the flower? Remember something we just talked about a couple of minutes ago? To do sexual reproduction. That's what the flower does, okay, or the flowers in an inflorescence. So for us, a flower is something pretty usually that you give to your mother on Mother's Day, or it's like the lei maybe that you might give to your daughter or your son or your cousin or your sister or brother at graduation. yeah? But to the flower, you know, so for us, for humans, the flowers mark special occasions, special events. But to the plant, the flower is a sex organ. Okay, it allows sex to happen. Sex allows the combining of traits from a male parent and a female parent. So here, the structure of this flower, the way it smells, probably like dead fish. Okay, it's to attract flies, to allow it to attract pollinators, to transfer pollen. So this structure here, this inflorescence can be up to 9 feet tall. It is actually the largest inflorescence of all the different kinds of flowers in the world. Okay, remember the inflorescence is the grouping of flowers, okay, in a flowering plant. Now this is a preserved specimen of the largest single flower in the world. This is a flower in the genus Rafflesia. And both this Titan arum and the Rafflesia, they're both native to Indonesia, okay, from very humid tropical areas. Now the Rafflesia, when it's a fresh flower, it also has the appearance of meat. It's kind of like a dull red color and has blotches on it. So this is a flower of the largest species, okay, of this type in the world. So this flower can measure 3 feet across. It's a single flower, and these are its petals. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 petals, okay? So this is actually a dicot flower, okay? Now thirdly, so if this Rafflesia is the largest single flower that is produced in the world, well, these little dots in here, these little green dots, these are pondweeds, okay? And these little dots produce the smallest flowers in the world. Okay, they're really, really, really small. They may be equivalent to about the size of a salt grain. So this little green thing here, this little green dot, is actually an entire plant. And the flower that it produces can be on the order of about the size of a grain of salt. Very, very small. So here, Rafflesia, you have the largest flower in the world. In these wolffias, W-O-L-F-F-I-A, the wolffia plant, okay, which is a pondweed, has probably the smallest flowers in the world. And in this Titan arum, here you have the largest inflorescence. Okay, isn't that amazing, right? So the amazing world of flowering plants, okay? Now here we're going to talk about dicot flowers and monocot flowers. We've seen so far several differences between dicots and monocots, okay? And here's another one. We have dicots. Dicots tend to have their floral parts in 4s or in 5s. So the Rafflesia that we saw, okay, in the earlier part, okay, is actually a dicot, right? So here you have one kind of dicot flowers, okay, so you can see that if you count the petals, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Dicots tend to have flower parts in 4s or in 5s. And here's another dicot. This too, this is a campanula in the Campanulaceae, and this too, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay? Now, if we go to the Elmo, okay, we can kind of move out here. Here's a native red hibiscus. We saw this, I believe, in our first lecture, native red hibiscus, and if you count the floral parts here, you have, right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 petals. Okay, this also is a dicot. And if you look at the sepals, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are 5 sepals. 5 sepals, 5 petals, a bunch of different stamens here, and here you have a 5-parted stigma. Okay, this part of the flower is actually sticky, and pollen will stick to it. All right? So we can kind of have that there. I also wanted to show you another plant, another native plant, and this is Achaea, okay, Wickstromia uva ursi. This is also known as a fish poison plant, okay. Hawaiian people used to use this plant. I guess what they would do is they would dig up the root, crush it, and throw it into the tide pools. What it will do, it will stun the fish. The fish would just come floating up to the surface of the water, and the people could just gather them by hand. Okay, isn't that amazing? So this here, you can see this is an example of a flower that has 4 floral parts. Here you can just see the petals. 1, 2, 3, 4. So this Wickstromia or Achaea is also a dicot, all right? Another plant that we can kind of look at here, okay? Another native Hawaiian plant, and this is a native endemic. This is actually a naupaka. Many people might be familiar with the naupaka. that you see at the beach, and generally their flowers are white. This one is like a creamy yellow, but you can see it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 petals. Yes. Another thing about the naupaka, it is a characteristic of this group that generally the petals are on one side of the flower. Okay, and indeed that's true. Okay, all the petals here are on this side of the flower. It looks a little different right now because I've actually picked it, you know. So here, yeah, so here we have the naupaka flower, yeah. Anyway, so this one here is a naupaka kuahivi. It's Scaevola gaudichaudii, all right. And so that is another example of a plant that has 5 petals, even though it is not symmetrical in the way that we usually like to think about it. Okay. Next, if we go back to the slides, all right, we can kind of see that monocots, okay, monocots tend to have floral parts in 3s, all right. So monocots, so dicots have floral parts in 4s as in 5s, and monocots have floral parts in 3s, all right. Here's one, very nice. You can see the 3 petals here, yeah. 1, 2, 3. And in this iris, you can sort of see it. We have sort of a side view, but I wanted to give you folks a little bit variety. 1, 2, 3 structures here. You'll have 1, 2, 3, okay, inwards to that. Furthermore, okay, if you look at a lily is like a completely outstanding example of a monocot type of flower. You can see that it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. These are called tepals just because the sepals and the petals look very much alike. But if you actually look at a budding and flowering lily, generally you'll have 1, 2, 3 sepals, 1, 2, 3 petals. But the petals and the sepals look very, very similar to each other. Okay? Another thing that I like about this particular image, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stamens, right? So still, you have floral parts in 3s or multiples of 3s. Okay? So you have 3 sepals, 3 petals, 6 stamens, and you do have this 1 pistil. And this is actually part of the flower. This is actually part of the style, okay, of this lily. Okay? So generally, you have dicots with floral parts in 4s or in 5s. Say, for example, you could have 4 sepals, 4 petals, 8 stamens, or some multiple of that, or you could have 5 sepals, 5 petals, 10 stamens, and etc. And you have monocots that have floral parts in 3s, like we just saw. Okay? Now another thing, we also have floral modifications or flower modifications. Okay? So in the model that we looked at before and on some of the flowers we've just seen, that you have, if you have all 4 parts, if you have sepals and petals and stamens and pistil, okay, if you have all these 4 parts present, that's something that we call a complete flower. Okay, you have all 4 parts of the flower present. Okay, that's called a complete flower. And in this case, here we have a beautiful photograph taken by Dr. Carr, okay, formerly of the Department of Botany at UHM, University of Hawaii at Manoa. And this is a flower of Hau, or Hibiscus tiliaceus, H-A-U, okay? It is a native plant, native to Hawaii. And one of the things you can see, we can't see the sepals so much here, but it does have sepals, okay? It has 5 petals. Okay, it also has these stamens, and here you see part of the pistil sticking out. This is a 5-parted stigma. This is related to the Hibiscus clayi that we saw, you know, the red hibiscus that we just saw. It is in the same genus. This is Hibiscus tiliaceus, and this is an example of a complete flower. It has all 4 floral parts present: sepal, petal, stamen, pistil. Okay. Furthermore, you can have flowers that are missing 1 or more of these parts. One of the 4 parts is missing. That's called an incomplete flower, okay? And so here we have another beautiful photograph taken by George Linney, right? And here you have the stigma, okay? Here you have a feathery stigma, and here you have the anthers. Okay, so you have the female parts, you have the male parts in these flowers, but you don't really have necessarily petals or sepals. Okay, so grass flowers usually are what they call incomplete flowers, missing one or more of the four parts. And you can see this is a good photograph too, because you can actually see that grasses do have flowers. Okay, grasses are flowering plants. You might not think it because maybe the flowers don't look like the flowers you usually think of, such as hibiscus, such as pikake, yeah, such as tuberose and all those nice smelling plumeria, yeah. But grasses do have flowers. They are flowering plants. Okay. Another thing is that if you have, you know, here's another grass, okay, another photograph taken by George Linney, and this here you have male and female parts present, even though this is actually a perfect flower. If you have both male and female parts present in a single flower, that means if you have a bisexual flower, okay, that just means you have both sexes in the flower. That's what they call a perfect flower, okay? Here you have the feathery stigmas of the pistil. Here you have the anther and the filament, yeah? So in these flowers, you have these perfect flowers, but even though these flowers are perfect, they're incomplete because they do not have sepals, they do not have petals, okay? And the fact that these grass flowers are stripped down, so to speak, that you don't actually have, you know, you don't have all, you know, that you don't have petals which can attract a pollinator, that does have something to do with the reproduction, because generally grass flowers are wind pollinated. They don't need a bee or a butterfly or a moth or a bird or even a mammal to come and transfer pollen from one plant to another. Okay, so grasses tend to have feathery stigmas to kind of catch the pollen. Another thing that you'll see about grass flowers is that, you know, what is it? Summertime, allergy season, right? A lot of people have allergies to pollen, and grass flowers tend to produce copious. They produce a lot of pollen, okay? So a lot of people are allergic to pollen because, you know, allergy is pretty much your body is reacting to something that's not so dangerous as if it's a dangerous thing, okay? So that's what we call an allergic reaction. And during the summertime, when you have all these grasses shedding all this pollen, copious amounts of pollen because the wind is taking the pollen and taking it to other grasses, that's when a lot of people's allergies act up, yeah, during late spring and early summer especially, right? Okay. Now in some flowers also, you can have male parts only or female parts only. Okay, that would be an imperfect flower. So if you have male and female in the same flower, that's a perfect flower. If you have male parts only or female parts only, that's an imperfect flower. Okay, and in this case here, we have a nice photograph taken by Dr. Carr, and here is croton, yeah, Codium variegatum. And here, these are flowers. Okay, we're going to see this again, but these are flowers that have only male parts in them. These are what they call staminate flowers, okay? If it has only male parts in the flower, it's called a staminate flower. And here, close up, beautiful close up taken by Dr. Carr, and you can see that this flower here, you can see the petals and etc. But here, you only have stamens. Okay, there are no pistils in here. You can even see the pollen grains. The pollen grains are really small. Pollen grains are actually the male gametophyte. What is a gametophyte? It's actually the plant that produces the gametes or the sperm, okay? And then here we can have female parts only, and those are called pistillate flowers, okay? And this is actually the same species. This is croton, Codium variegatum, okay, taken by Dr. Carr again. It's in the Euphorbiaceae, so amazingly, crotons are actually related to kukui trees, okay? They're in the same family. So here, these are the pistillate flowers, okay? They only have pistil. It's only pistil. So this is a three-parted stigma. 3 parts of the stigma here. Here's a style, and the ovaries over here. So here you have a pistillate flower of croton. Okay, other flower modifications, okay, are continuing with what we were just talking about. If you have unisexual flowers or staminate flowers and pistillate flowers on one plant, like we saw in the croton, it's called monoecious or monoecious. Okay, monoecious means one house. It's like a male and a female living together in one house. Okay, so as an example, local example that people might be familiar with, we have the ulu or the breadfruit, Artocarpus altilis. Okay, so here we have a female flower, okay, which will develop into the fruit. Okay, so the female inflorescence of the ulu, okay, is actually on one tree, on the same tree as a male inflorescence. But here you have ulu, female ulu flowers, okay? And here is a close-up. Now you can see here that the flowers are very reduced. They don't actually have sepals or petals, so what does that make it, right? It makes it an incomplete flower, right? It also doesn't have male in this flower. Here you can actually see it's already been pollinated and fertilized, so here you can see the stigma and the style are drying up. They're drying up, they're going to fall off, and this part here is a little fruitlet. Okay, so if you actually look at an ulu fruit, a breadfruit, right, a breadfruit fruit, actually what you'll see is that you'll actually have what they call a multiple fruit. A multiple fruit develops from multiple flowers. We're going to see this in the next lecture, okay? But you can see that here, okay, is one pistil or one pistillate flower was here, another one here. So when you have many flowers forming together a single fruit, it's called a multiple fruit. And so breadfruit has a multiple fruit. And here we have a close-up of the ulu male flowers. So you can see that the flowers are different. Here you can see the anthers. So the ulu male flowers, they're sort of like a finger-shaped projection. They're sort of like finger-shaped, they're long and skinny, and these are the flowers that are in a male inflorescence of the ulu. And of course you have male inflorescences and female inflorescences. You have male inflorescences with male flowers, you have the female inflorescences with the female flowers on the same plant. Male flowers, female flowers in the same plant, that's called monaceae, male and female in one house, okay? All right, monaceae, okay? Now if we go back to the slides, we can see another kind of modification. You can have staminate flowers or male flowers on one plant, and you can have pistillate flowers or female flowers on another plant. That's called dioecious. That means that these plants are dioecious. That means you have male plants and female plants, and that means you have males on one plant, females in other plants, males in one house, female in the other house. You can think of it two houses. Di means two, and ecious refers to house, so two houses, okay? If it can help you remember this, if you know a little bit about Hawaiian ethnobotany, okay, you can think of the fact that in traditional Hawaiian kauhale, you know, the housing compounds that traditional Hawaiian people used to live in, especially the ali'i, yeah, and some of the higher born people, what they had is they had a halemua, the men's house. Females were forbidden to go there. And then for the women, you had something called a menstruation house, or the halepea, that women would retire to when they're having, you know, during a certain part of their cycle. So in that tradition, you had the men's house, the halemua, you had the halepea, so you had males in one place, females in another, okay? So you can think of dioecious in that way too, okay? So a good example, if we can go to the slides again, we have hala. Okay, Pandanus tectorius, or called screw pine. And here you have a beautiful photograph of the inflorescence. This is the male inflorescence, and this is known as hinano. Yeah, some people might know young men whose name is hinano. Yeah, so this is a male inflorescence, and you have these really soft, you know, creamy colored bracts. These bracts were actually used to make mats, sleeping mats, for high ali'i, for ali'i. Okay. They're fragrant, and the male inflorescence, the pollen from the male inflorescence was considered an aphrodisiac. It's supposed to be very sweet smelling. Okay, so here you have a male inflorescence on a male tree, okay, or dioecious. And here we have a fruit, another multiple fruit, okay, of the hala, and this is on a female plant. Okay, a female plant, a female tree. Pandanus tectorius, also known as hala, also known as screw pine, okay? So there's a female hala tree with a female fruit, okay? And if you took a section of the fruit when it was not quite ripe yet, when these fruitlets aren't ripe yet, you can actually see that they're orange. There are some varieties of the hala fruit that are yellow and are golden and orange. There are some varieties that are red too. And in Hawaii, the hala varieties that we had in Hawaii, people use it as a famine food, because I've been told that the Hawaiian varieties of hala tended to have kind of bitter tasting fruits, so people would eat them in times of food shortages. They were not necessarily the first choice of the people. And another thing too is I believe people in other Pacific Island groups tended to do eat as part of their normal diet, they will eat challah fruits, and they'd eat this part here. Another thing you could use challah fruitlets for is that you could actually cut them and make lei out of them. Usually, I think traditionally, most people consider that if you make a challah lei, you would only use it for yourself. You tended to give it to people, you know, when they're at the end of some major part of their life. Yeah, because I guess it has to do with endings. Yeah, all right. Okay. Anyway, so as we can see that you know, a lot of the plants in Hawaii do have relationships with the people of Hawaii, the native people, the first people of Hawaii. Okay, that a lot of different kinds of sayings, a lot of different kind of uses for plants, whether they're native plants or plants that they brought as well. Okay, so some of the most important things about plants for us humans, of course, is how we humans have used them. Okay, so the field, remember that the field of study that deals with the uses of plants by indigenous people is called ethnobotany, right? Okay, now getting into other parts of the flower, we also have two different kinds of symmetry, okay, in the plant, all right? So we have two different kinds of symmetry. We have radial symmetry and we have bilateral symmetry, okay? So radial symmetry can be shown by this plant here, and these are daffodils. These could either be daffodils or narcissuses, but I think they're daffodils, yeah? And if you look at it, radial symmetry, what do you think of when you think of radial? You think of tires, radial tires. You think of the radius of a circle, right? So what it is that this is a monocot. Clearly, you have, you know, 3 sepals, 3 petals, yeah? So what you can do is you can actually take, if you were to cut it, or cut it along one plane here, you would have mirror images. This side is like a mirror image of this side. You could cut it here too, okay? So radially symmetrical flowers are flowers that you could cut along more than one plane when you're facing it from face on, and you would have mirror images of each other, okay, of them. So another kind of flower that shows this radial symmetry are things like this jasmine that we see on the Elmo here. If you were to look at a single flower, okay, and you were to cut it along certain planes, you would have mirror images along more than one plane, okay? All right? And you can see some ants crawling around there on that. Living things, that's it. That's a whole adventure, you know, with biology, is that there's always something that comes up, you know. And it's one of the things that happens in class sometimes is that the student might be, you might be looking in the microscope, looking at an alga or looking at a water plant, and then all of a sudden there's something shung, shung, shung in your field of view. And that is like an animal, and people go, wow, there's an animal in here. You know, so that's kind of like an interesting thing, okay? Now another thing too, is we also have bilateral symmetry as well. Okay, so if we can go to the slides, you can see a beautiful image here of many orchids. Bilateral symmetry occurs when you have a flower, you can actually cut it down the center only, cut it right down the center, and you would have mirror images, just like this Cattleya, okay? This is an oncidium or some kind of relative to oncidiums. If you cut it down the center, you would have mirror images. This used to be called Oncidium papilio, and it does look like a butterfly. Papilio means butterfly. You have all these different kinds of Cattleya orchids. You can just cut them down right down the center, and you would have mirror images, and that's called bilateral symmetry. Okay, you could see that even this flower here, this sort of looks like Schomburgkia. It's a relative of the Cattleyas. If you cut it along this way, you don't have mirror images on this side and this side. Okay. So, and this is some kind of a oncidium relative. Anyway, so you can see that with a lot of these orchids, you can cut them right down the center. Okay, and so that this is a good example of what we call bilateral symmetry. Okay, now if we go back to the Elmo and look at these plants here, these flowers here, we're going to zoom out. Okay, let's see, wide. Okay, and then these are flowers of the royal poinciana. Okay, if I break off a flower, sorry. So this is an inflorescence, a grouping of flowers. If I show you this one flower here, you can see that it does have 5 petals, does have 5 sepals. It is actually a dicot, right? It has, I think it has 10 stamens, all right? So you can see that if you cut it down this way, just in this plane here, all the way down in this other, you know, different colored petal, you would have 2 mirror images. Okay, so this also is another flower that shows bilateral symmetry, okay? I wanted to just break it off because it was kind of hard to see with that. Now if you look at this one here, this is Pohinahina, okay? Pohinahina, a native plant, okay? It's also known as Vitex ovata. If you look at this kind of bluish colored flower, okay, you could cut it right down the center, okay, and then you'd have mirror images. Otherwise, that would not be the case. Okay, so this is another example, the Pohinahina or Vitex rotundifolia. If I said Vitex ovata, that's wrong. It's now called Vitex rotundifolia. Okay, another example of a plant with bilateral symmetry. All right. Okay, if we can get back to the slides here. Okay, so we just talked about this, that an inflorescence is actually a grouping of flowers. Okay, it's a group of flowers, so you can have even inflorescences that are solitary, you know, like a tulip or oftentimes roses. At the very tip of the stem, you'll have one single flower. That's called a solitary flower. There are a whole bunch of different kinds of inflorescences, okay? Don't worry about that. I know your text talks about it a little bit, like the spikes, the racemes, the cymes, and all that kind of thing. The only one I really want you to really know about necessarily is what we call the head. Okay, it's called either a capitulum or a head. You might think, what does a head have to do with a capitulum? Well, when you think about it, right, capital, you know, they talk about, okay, people actually consume this much sugar per capita. When they say per capita, that means per person or per head. When you think about capital punishment, originally what that means is usually they chop off somebody's head. You know, I know this is kind of gory stuff, but I'm just trying to show the relationship between a capitulum and the head. Okay, so you say per capita or per head of people or per person, right? So the sunflower family actually has an inflorescence. So this looks like a single flower. This is a bidens species, bidens, yeah? And it's in the sunflower family, also known as the Asteraceae or the Compositae. They're called composites. Why? If you kind of look carefully at this, these look like petals. Okay, and this looks like the center of the flower, typical daisy or sunflower family member. But if you look at it closely, each of these is actually an individual flower. Okay, so in the sunflower family, you have an inflorescence known as a head. Okay, so here under this elmo here, okay, here we have an inflorescence of what we call Widelia. Widelia trilobata. It's also known as beach daisy. If we zoom closer, we can actually see that this whole inflorescence is actually made up of many flowers. Okay? Let's see, if I had a needle, I should have brought a needle. That's all right. So here you can actually see, if you tease it apart, each of these little things in here. Let me actually open it up. Sorry, flower, but we're going to have to dissect you a little bit. Okay, so here you can see, oops, let's see, focus. Oops, let's see, that didn't work. All right. Okay, here we go. All right, so in here, we see all the little things in here. Each of these is actually a flower. It's actually a complete flower. It has the remains of the sepals. It has little petals, the ones that you see through. You can see the anthers through there, the little dark places. And here you have a two-parted stigmas at the top. You know, those little things that's kind of forking away, right? So a so-called daisy family member is actually, you know, it's not just a flower, okay? It's actually a bunch of flowers. Why would nature do that? Okay, think about it. Why would nature do that? Right? Think about it. Well, because for one thing, if you have like a yellow inflorescence like that, if you have a bee, you know, going on there and running around on there, you can actually have the pollination of many flowers all at the same time, all at one time. The bee would just visit it one time and you get a whole bunch of pollination going on. That's one thing. Okay, so if we can go back to the slides again. Okay, so we have the sunflower family, and we also have here's a picture of like the most famous plant from Hawaii. And this, of course, is Argyropsiphium sandwichense. It's also known as a Haleakala silver sword, okay? You can see these three fine fellows here too, all right? So this is the Haleakala silver sword in all its glory. You can see that the plant itself, these silvery parts are actually the leaves. They're long and skinny, and they live at very high elevation above the cloud line, above 5,000 to 7,000 feet. They live in the alpine desert up on Haleakala. And here you can see that this is the inflorescence. You have all these, individual inflorescences because the Haleakala silversword is indeed in the same group as the daisy family members. It's in the daisy family. Okay, so here, this person here who has his name, I guess they're trying to make it like the Three Stooges, but this here is Dr. Carr. Okay, Dr. Carr, who took a lot of the photographs, a lot of the beautiful photographs that you see in these presentations. Okay, and if you look at this other photograph, there's another photograph by Dr. Carr. This is actually a head, okay, an inflorescence of one of those, structures that you saw on that Haleakala silversword. So every one of these is actually a flower. Not only has he managed to capture the inflorescence here very well, you can even see the hairs, the trichomes on these fused petals here. But here you can see actually a little insect. Yeah, this might actually be I'm not sure, but it might be, it's probably a native insect that probably lives on the Haleakala silversword plant. Okay, so this is actually a silversword head or silversword capitulum. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that neat? Okay. Okay, so next we're going to talk about what happens in the flower. Okay, so meiosis, okay, has to do with sex in plants. All right, sex. What is sex? Sex is when you have a sperm and an egg fusing, right? That's fertilization. Okay, so sex in plants involves the fusion, okay, of gametes. Okay, fusion of gametes. What are gametes? Gametes are sex cells. They're also known as egg and sperm. Okay, egg coming from the female parent, sperm coming from the male parent. All right, so sex in plants, very interesting. Okay, what happens is that when fertilization happens, or the fusion of egg and sperm happens, you have a zygote, okay, a new individual. It's very similar to what happens in us humans and other animals, okay? Generally, you have egg from the mother, sperm from the father, fusing and forming a zygote, okay? That's a single-celled individual that has genetic material from the father and the mother, from both. And the zygote then develops into the embryo, into a new individual plant in this case. In our case, a new individual human being, okay? So generally, this zygote and the resulting new individual has genetic material from the mother and from the father. So just like you have traits that you inherited from your mother, you also have traits that you inherited from your father as well, okay? And so in this case, sex in plants as well as sex in animals, a process known as meiosis is important, okay? You would have gotten that from your reading. Why would meiosis be so important, okay, in humans as well as in plants? Why is meiosis important? So think about that for a couple of minutes. Okay, so when you have meiosis happening, what happens? Meiosis allows for the reduction of chromosome number, okay? We humans, in our bodies, we have 46 chromosomes. In our body, in just our body cells, okay, we have 46 chromosomes. That's our diploid number. Okay, we call it the diploid number or the 2N number because we have two sets of chromosomes. One set from our father, one set from our mother. Or as a teacher, I sat in on a class, she said, one set from mom, one set from dad. Okay, so we have two sets of chromosomes in our body cells. Okay, one set from dad, one set from mom. Same thing in plants. In plants, they are generally, they have a diploid number. Okay, they have all kinds of diploid number, 42, 36, 72, all like that. But generally plants have one set of chromosomes from their father, one set of chromosomes from the mother, the sperm donor and the egg donor, okay? So meiosis, what does meiosis do? It will actually reduce the chromosome number by half. So in us humans, in ovaries and in testes, okay, ovaries in females, testes of males, you have meiosis happening. And what you end up with in males, you'll have haploid, sperm. So the sperm, okay, sperm in male human beings has 23 chromosomes. Eggs in female human beings has 23 chromosomes. So when sperm fuses with the egg, okay, and then what you have is a restoration of the diploid number. Haploid sperm, haploid egg, okay, fuse together in fertilization, and what you'll have is a restoration of the diploid number. But first, you have to have a process known as meiosis happening. Okay, so meiosis happens because you need to reduce the number of chromosomes by half. Okay. So generally, sex in plants is a little bit different from what we have sex in humans or sex in animals. Okay, in plants, the process known as meiosis results in haploid spore. So meiosis in plants as well as in animals reduces the chromosome number. So what you have is spores with half the chromosome number. What happens next? Okay, so this actually occurs, and then meiosis occurs in something called a sporophyte. Okay, a sporophyte. The sporophyte is actually the plant, okay, that produces the spores. All right. So sporo refers to spore, phyte refers to plant. Okay, so the sporophyte is a plant that produces the spores. Okay. The next thing that happens is that the spores, okay, will actually germinate, okay, to produce another plant. Okay, these plants are what we call haploid gametophytes. These gametophytes only have half the chromosome number, okay, of the sporophyte. These haploid gametophytes are the plants that produce the gametes. The gametophytes are the plants that produce the sex cells or sperm and egg. Okay, so the haploid gametophytes produce gametes, right? And so in plants, unlike animals, plants have something called an alternation of generation. Okay? Alrighty, in the alternation of generation, first of all, this structure here, this round structure is representing an individual sporophyte, an individual plant. It could be a fern plant, or the part that you usually see, the fern leaf and the fern rhizome, and etc. It could be like a pine tree, okay, or it could be a magnolia tree. It could be an apple tree, okay. It could be a weed growing in your garden, okay. It could be a grass, okay. So this is actually representing the sporophyte, okay. This sporophyte is diploid. It has 2 sets of chromosomes, okay. Now what happens is in the sporophyte, okay, it actually will have reproductive structures in flowering plants that will be flowers, okay, and in this reproductive structure, you'll have meiosis happening, okay, meiosis happening to produce haploid spores. So in a flowering plant, okay, it's the flower in which meiosis is happening, okay. Meiosis will happen in the anthers, okay, will happen in the anthers of the stamens, and will also happen in the ovary, okay, and producing something called the embryonic sac, okay, the embryo sac. Okay, so what you'll have is that after meiosis happens, you'll have the production of spores, okay. The spores will then develop through mitosis, okay, so one kind of spore will develop into one kind of gametophyte, or the plant that produces the gamete, okay. The other kind of spore will produce another kind of gametophyte, okay, that produces another kind of gamete. So one will produce sperm, okay, or the male gametes, and the other one will produce eggs, or the female gametes, okay. So okay, let's back up and go over it again. You have the individual sporophyte, okay, and in the sex part, the sex organs of the individual sporophyte, you'll have meiosis happening, and this meiosis will produce haploid spores. Okay, the spores will then germinate and develop into the gametophytes. Okay, the spore develops into the gametophytes. The spores are produced by the sporophyte. The gametophytes then, okay, will produce gametes or sex cells. Okay, the male gametophyte will produce a sperm. The female gametophyte will produce the egg. Okay. And in flowering plants, the male gametophyte, as I mentioned before, is actually just the pollen grain. So in flowering plants, the male gametophyte is very, very, very reduced. Okay, very reduced. It's just a pollen grain. And it is the pollen grain that will produce the the sperm. Okay. In the female gametophyte will produce the embryo sac, which will house the egg. Okay. When the sperm and the egg fuse in the process of fertilization, it produces the single-celled diploid zygote. Okay, so on this side of this alternation of generation phase, this is a diploid phase. Okay, so you have the zygote here, okay, diploid zygote, all right? The two events, okay, from one side to the other side, meiosis on one side reduces the chromosome number. Fertilization restores the diploid number again, okay? Anyway, the zygote will then undergo mitosis, and you know, just like in a conceived, you know, human zygote, you'll have mitosis going on, and then you'll have the production of an embryo, okay, and eventually an individual human being. In plants, the zygote will undergo mitosis and produce the individual sporophyte. Okay, it will actually become an embryo in the seed, and then as the seed germinates and then you have cell division going on, you'll have the individual mature sporophyte being developed, okay? Anyway, so that is alternation of generations, okay? So next we're going to go into, you know, what goes into meiosis, right? What actually happens during meiosis. But first, okay, we're going to do a little review of mitosis, okay? So mitosis, you recall, okay? You start off with a diploid cell in mitosis. And here, this is showing an individual cell with two sets of chromosomes. So in this cell, this is a diploid cell, okay, with 4 chromosomes, okay, 2 sets of 2 chromosomes, yeah? So this one, this large, and this large one here, this is one set of 2 chromosomes, one from the father, one from the mother. Here's another set of chromosomes. Anyway, so we have 2 sets of 2 chromosomes, the small one and the big one here from the father, small one and the big one from the mother. Okay? During the cell cycle, remember you have the gap 1 phase, through which the cell is metabolically active. It's actually making more organelles. The cell is growing. Then it undergoes the S phase, right? The S phase, right? During the S phase, you have DNA synthesis, right? Where the chromosomes duplicate themselves exactly, okay? Then after the S phase of the interphase, you'll have gap phase 2, gap 2 phase. And during the gap 2 phase, the cell is readying itself for mitosis, okay? Mitosis. Now mitosis starts with prophase, the chromosomes become visible. Then you have metaphase, and here is metaphase. And you can see that during metaphase metaphase, just like in prophase, you'll have the fact that each of the chromosomes will have duplicated themselves, and each of the resulting 2 sister chromatids are joined together at the centromere, okay? So this chromatid is exactly the same as this chromatid. This chromatid is exactly the same as this chromatid. They're genetically identical. So these are 2 sister chromatids making up a single chromosome. So see, you can see that in metaphase, you still have, okay, 2n, or the diploid number, equals 4, right? You have 1 set of chromosomes from the father, 1 set of chromosomes from the mother, okay? Then we have anaphase, okay, and this is when the sister chromatids are pulled apart, and after they're pulled apart, they're actually known as single chromosomes once again. So you can see that this chromosome and this chromosome are the same, or they're identical to each other, this one, and etc., that these are the same. So after anaphase, okay, then you have telophase, when you have the beginnings of the cell plate. But after cytokinesis or cell division, remember that mitosis actually covers only nuclear division. After cytokinesis, you'll have 2 daughter cells genetically identical to the first cell that we started with, and the mother cell or the parent cell, and they're identical to each other. That's what happens in mitosis. Remember that mitosis also functions in growth, it functions in repair, right? Those are 2 of the main functions of mitosis, growth and repair, okay? And sometimes it also functions in asexual reproduction. Asexual because you start off with 1 parent, right? Okay, so that in a nutshell is mitosis. Now, getting into meiosis. I don't understand why. I really don't understand why that they actually make the words so similar to each other, because I know for students it's confusing. They both begin with M, you know, and even the structure of the word looks really similar to each other, okay? Anyway, so meiosis is a different case. Meiosis has to do with sexual reproduction, okay? Because during meiosis, you have a halving of a chromosome number. The chromosome number goes from a diploid number to a haploid number, okay, or half the chromosome number that you have in the mother cell, okay? Okay, so meiosis actually covers 2 divisions. Remember, in mitosis, you only have 1 division, Okay, you only have mitosis that only has one division, so you end up with 2 daughter cells from 1 parent cell. Meiosis, you might start with 1 parent cell, but you'll end up with 4 daughter cells. And there are generally 2 divisions in meiosis. Generally, we call them meiosis 1 and meiosis 2, okay, because then we can differentiate them between each other, okay? Meiosis 1, furthermore, is sometimes known as reduction division. It's known as reduction division because after meiosis 1, you'll end up with 2 daughter cells with half the chromosome number of their mother cell, okay? And of course, meiosis 1 has a prophase 1, okay? And in meiosis, prophase 1 is usually the longest part. The cell actually spends most of its time in prophase 1 because there are certain important events that happen during prophase 1. During prophase 1, you have the fact that you have that what we call homologous chromosomes, okay, or chromosomes that carry the same genes. They tend to be attracted to each other. And what they'll do is they will oftentimes exchange genetic material, okay? Okay, so the chromatin will condense to form chromosomes, okay? Another thing that will happen is that those homologous chromosomes that I was just talking about, these homologous chromosomes will pair with each other, okay? They'll pair with each other, all right? In structures known as chiasmata, all right? And I'm sorry, they're called crossing over. They'll form tetrads, all right? And they have places where they will cross each other and they can actually exchange genetic material. So homologous chromosomes, like you'll have 1 chromosome from the mother of the organism that this is undergoing, 1 chromosome from the father, and so you have crossing over, and that allows for recombination or mixing up of genetic material. Okay, so crossing over, a very important part of prophase 1. Okay, metaphase 1. That occurs when the homologous chromosomes will actually line up at the equator of the cell, okay? So in this case, metaphase 1, the homologous chromosomes will line up at the equator of the cell, okay? Okay, so then, okay, anaphase 1 happens when the homologous chromosomes separate. They go to opposite sides of the cell. Then telophase 1, you have the cell plate beginning to form. So all these 4 phases, okay, they're named similar to how you see in mitosis, but they're different because after telophase 1, okay, after telophase 1 and cytokinesis, the 2 resulting daughter cells are haploid. They're haploid. They have half the chromosome number as the parent cell. Not only that, but also due to the fact that you had crossing over during prophase 1 of meiosis 1, okay, you'll have the fact that the 2 daughter cells are genetically unsimilar. They're dissimilar to each other. They're not the same, okay? Another thing too is that the nuclear material is haploid, okay? Now, this next division is called, of course, meiosis 2. Sometimes people call it mitotic division. Why would they call it mitotic division? Okay, is that it's very, very similar, okay? It's actually very similar, okay, to mitosis, okay, except that, guess what? The cells are haploid, okay? So you have prophase 2, you have metaphase 2, okay, where the chromosomes are lined up at the equator. You have anaphase 2, where the chromatids, now individual chromosomes, are separating from each other. And then telophase 2, where you have the beginning of the cell plate formation, then cytokinesis, okay? I know this is a lot of words, you know, and we'll look at images in a sec, okay? So in terms of meiosis, okay, first of all, this is the same thing we started with when we started with mitosis. First of all, you start off with a diploid cell. And in this case, you have the 2n number, or the diploid number, equals 4. You have 1 set of chromosomes from the mother, 1 set of chromosomes from the father, okay? Now, before meiosis, you also have, you know, an interphase. You have the gap 1 phase, you have the synthesis phase where the chromosome material is duplicated, and then you'll have the gap 2 phase, okay? You'll have the gap 2 phase, yeah, where you'll have the cell metabolically active and kind of getting ready to do meiosis, all right? Then after prophase 1 happens, okay, you have prophase 1, okay, so you have the S phase, all right? And then after prophase 1 happens, okay, where you have You know, you'll have the double chromosomes, right? You have the crossing over. So the double chromosomes from the mother's side will have 2 chromatids. The double chromosome from the father's side will have 2 chromatids. These chromosomes will be attracted to each other and exchange genetic material, okay? Then at metaphase, okay, the homologous chromosomes will orient themselves so that they will actually be together. So one homologous chromosome will go to one side, the other homologous chromosome will go to the other side. So what are homologous chromosomes? Homologous chromosomes, if you remember, are chromosomes that have the same genes on them. They have the same genes on the chromosome, will code for certain traits, okay? So this is the homologous chromosome. They're generally about the same size as each other. They have the same genes on each other. What is a gene? A gene is a part along the chromosome that will code for a particular trait, such as flower color, okay, or seed color, or seed shape, or fruit color, okay? Anyway, so these two are homologous chromosomes. They will actually code for, they have codes for the same genes on them, okay, coding for the same traits. So these two are homologous chromosomes. You can see they're about the same size, about the same shape as each other, and these two are homologous chromosomes. So during metaphase 1 of meiosis 1, okay, or reduction division, homologous chromosomes will orient themselves so that they're at the equator of the cell together, okay? Then during anaphase 1, the homologous chromosomes will separate. So you see that on this side, you only have 2 chromosomes. On this side, you only have 2 chromosomes, even though when you first started with, you started with 4 chromosomes, okay? So anaphase 1, and after telophase 1, where the cell plate begins to form, and then when you have cytokinesis, what you have in one cell is you'll have the haploid number. You have n equals 2. Remember, you started with 4n equals 4. Well, here you have n equals 2. Here you have n equals 2. Okay, so here both cells, both daughter cells, you can see are different from each other. They're different from each other. They're different from their parent cell. Okay, they are haploid as well. Okay, so after telophase 1 and cytokinesis of meiosis 1, you'll have 2 daughter cells different from each other, different from the parent cell. Another thing you'll notice is that they're both haploid. That's why we call meiosis 1 reduction division. Okay. Now, after reduction division, the cells will then undergo another division. Okay, so if you actually take one cell, okay, and go through prophase, metaphase, where you have the chromosomes aligned at the equator, then you have anaphase 2, then what happens is that the sister chromatids will then be pulled apart. Okay, so during anaphase 2, you'll see that this cell still has only 2 chromosomes. This cell has 2 chromosomes. So you can see that it's very similar to anaphase of mitosis, except that the cells are haploid. Okay? And after telophase 2, where you have the cell wall beginning to form, right, the cell plate beginning to form, and then you have the cell wall beginning to form, and then you have cytokinesis, you'll have, in fact, from that one of the daughter cell, you'll have 2 daughter cells, both of them different from each other. They should be different from each other, and they would be different from their parent cell as well. The other cell that resulted after reduction division would also have undergone the same type of mitotic division. So in the end of meiosis, you'll have 4 daughter cells, okay? Anyway, so what happens is that whether it's in the pollen grain or it's in the embryo sac of the female part of the flower, okay, you'll have 2 haploid cells, egg and sperm, okay, forming gametes, egg and sperm. So sperm is a male gamete, the egg is a female gamete, okay? And after they fuse and fertilization happens, they will form a diploid zygote. Okay, so once again, when the sperm and the egg fuse, okay, they will form a diploid zygote. So what you have here is a restoration, okay, of the chromosome numbers. Okay, so what you'll have is 2n again, diploid number equals 4 in terms of this cell here. Okay? All right, so here you have this diploid zygote. Okay, so here we can actually compare meiosis, okay, the 2 different divisions of meiosis with mitosis. So here you see that in both cases you start off with a diploid cell. Okay? This diploid cell, okay, in mitosis, what happens then? You'll have prophase, And then here you have metaphase. And in metaphase, you have, this 2n number. You have each of these sister chromatids are identical to each other, right? And you have the metaphase chromosomes all aligned at the equator. And then during anaphase of mitosis, okay, you see that one sister chromatid and the other sister chromatid, both sets will migrate to opposite sides of the cell. So on this side you have one set, on this side you have the other. Not furthermore, you'll have the fact that both of these should be identical to each other. Both of these cells are identical to each other. They're also identical to their parent cell that they started with, okay? So that is the result of mitosis. You'll have two diploid cells identical to each other and also identical to their parent cells, okay? Now in meiosis, you also start off with a diploid number, okay? You have a diploid cell, right? And then what you'll have here is that first of all, you'll have, the prophase where you have crossing over happen in meiosis in prophase 1. Then during metaphase of meiosis 1, you have the homologous chromosomes oriented at the equator of the cell. During anaphase of meiosis 1, you have, okay, the chromosomes separating. So then after cytokinesis, after telophase and cytokinesis of meiosis 1, you'll have two daughter cells, okay, two daughter cells that are haploid, right? You see that these two cells have only 2 chromosomes in them, yeah? Whereas these daughter cells have 4 chromosomes in them, right? Anyway, so here you have 2 daughter cells after the first division, the reduction division of meiosis 1, okay? 2 daughter cells different from each other, okay? Then these two, if you actually just look at one of these daughter cells, that one will undergo, you'll have the anaphase 2 happening. You'll end up with 2 daughter cells, okay? Both of them with half the chromosome number, okay? But what you don't see here is that this cell will also undergo the same thing. It will actually undergo another mitotic division. So what you'll end up with at the end of meiosis is 4 daughter cells, okay? Different from each other, different from their parent cell, okay? All right, and I believe we'll see that in the next one that we're just going to look at, okay? So now we're going to look at the main events of meiosis. First of all, we have here, okay, a little different depiction, but it's actually this, very similar. You have 2 chromosomes from the father, 2 chromosomes from the mother. This one and this one forming a homologous pair. This one, little one, and this little one forming another homologous pair, okay? Then after the cell cycle, when the chromosomes are duplicated and after the S phase, so after the gap 1 phase, the S phase, the gap 2 phase, and then here, after prophase, when crossing over has happened. Remember that during prophase 1, a very important event during prophase 1 of meiosis 1 is called crossing over. What happens is that this homologous chromosome would have been all blue, would have been from the father, this would have been all red, but during prophase 1, they would have actually been attracted to each other and exchanged genetic material with each other. The same thing happened with this homologous pair of chromosomes. Okay, so what you'll have is a recombination of genetic material, okay? So after that happens, so these homologous chromosomes, right? After they divide, what you'll have is you'll have these 2 daughter cells, daughter nuclei, okay, after meiosis 1 with different chromosomes in them. Okay, they would have actually segregated. They would have actually have moved, randomly. Okay, and we have to remember that we're looking at cells that only have a diploid number of 4. And we humans, of course, we have 46, a diploid number of 46. Plant cells have all kinds of diploid numbers, but along the same order of magnitude. This is actually shown because I guess if we try to show 46 chromosomes or 24 or 42 or 72, we couldn't track all of them. It would be very difficult. So here you have the 2 daughter nuclei, and you can see that these cells are haploid. They only have 2 chromosomes in them. Okay. Now after meiosis 2, okay, also known as mitotic division, the chromatids would have separated. So what you end up with, okay, after meiosis 2, after meiosis is finished, whether it's in the anther or in the ovary of the flower, okay, you end up with 4 nuclei, okay, haploid nuclei. They're all haploid. They're all different from each other. Okay, this is the likeliest thing to happen. They will all be different from each other. They will all be different from their mother cell or their parent cell. Okay? All right, so that is actually the result, what we would get from meiosis. All right? All right, so the results of meiosis, okay, is that generally we'll end up with 4 daughter cells, okay, each of them different from each other, and each of them different from the parent cell you started with, okay. Furthermore, you'll also have pollen, okay, in the stamen and ovules in the pistil. Okay, those are the results of meiosis. And the pollen itself is a very, very, very reduced male gametophyte, because pollen is sometimes only 1 cell or only maybe just a few cells large. They're very, very teeny. So in angiosperms, in the flowering plants, the pollen is actually a very, very, very reduced male gametophyte. When we get into plant diversity, we'll talk more about the gametophytes of different kinds of plants. Now, what we call the embryo sac actually corresponds to the female gametophyte, okay? So in this case also, the female gametophyte is very, very reduced. So gametophyte is the plant that produces the gamete, okay? Now, okay, in meiosis, okay, in bacteria, okay, so meiosis does not happen in bacteria. They actually have a process known as binary fission. Okay, generally what happens first, okay, is we have DNA replication, and you can see here that the single chromosome inside a bacterial cell is actually circular, whereas in plant cells they're linear, okay, the chromosomes. So you have DNA replication, you have the fact that the chromosomes will segregate from each other, and then you have the fact that then you have the cell division, okay, between bacterial cells. So this is called binary fission. So in prokaryotic cells like bacteria, okay, it's actually very different than from plant cells or animal cells, okay? Okay, so far, so what we've seen is we talked a little bit about the flower and such, and we also talked about meiosis and alternation of generations. And if we can go back to the, let's see, to the slides, we can kind of get onto the summary, okay? All right, so the summary. So we have learned that a flower is a short shoot with modified leaves, okay? We also talked about sexual reproduction, okay? That is a function of the flower in a flowering plant. We talked about the fact that sepals function in protecting the flower, okay, while it's in bud. The petals, main function of them is to attract a pollinator, all right? The stamens also are called the male part of the flower. They're made up of anther and filament, right? And they produce the male gametophyte, and the male gametophyte produces a sperm, okay? And the pistil is the female part of the flower, okay, the gynoecium, and it's made up of the stigma, the sticky stigma, the stylish style, and the ovary. The ovary is the place where you will have the embryo sac that produces the female gamete, also known as the egg. Okay? We also talked about the fact that dicots have flower parts in 4s or 5s, monocots have floral parts in 3s. We also talked about different kinds of flower modifications, yeah, about perfect flowers, imperfect flowers, complete flowers, incomplete flowers. We talked about monaceae and dioecious, unisexual flowers, right? We talked about radial and bilateral symmetry. We also talked a little bit about the inflorescence. The inflorescence is just a grouping of flowers. We talked about the head, or capitulum. We talked about meiosis. And we also talked about the alternation of generations, okay? So that's all we're going to cover today, all right? It's kind of very interesting stuff, isn't it? Think about it. We humans, we were able to actually figure out all these things. Anyway, so that's all we have time for today, and we'll see you next time, okay? Bye-bye.